Welcome to today's CCS Talks webinar from the Global CCS Institute, the latest in our series of webinars to highlight key trends and developments for carbon capture and storage technologies and projects globally. My name is Bruno Geritz. I'm a client engagement lead working from the Brussels office. For those who are not familiar with the Institute, we are an international think tank. Our mission is to accelerate the deployment of CCS, a vital technology to reduce emissions to net zero and achieve global climate change targets. We're a member-based organization backed by governments, businesses, and NGOs with offices around the world. My role is to find new members and to make sure existing members find value from annual membership. If this is of interest, feel free to contact me. Now, a few details in terms of technicalities. You can adjust your view via the toolbar shown here at the top of your screen, choosing to view presenter only or all panel members, which in a little while will become more relevant. If you cannot view this toolbar, you may be in full screen mode, so simply escape out of that. We will be collecting questions during the presentation. You can send in those questions. We have one of my colleagues, Angus Gillespie, sitting there collecting them, and at the end there will be a Q&A session as well where these can be asked. The webinar will be recorded. This is all being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to all registrants within 24 hours. If you are tweeting today, then please mention us and use the hashtag CCS Talks at CCS Talks. Good, I think that's about the logistics. In terms of first presenter, Martijn Verwoerd. After graduating from Stanford University in geophysics, Martijn joined Royal Dutch Shell. He worked with Shell across the world in technical and managerial roles, ending back in the Netherlands as the Vice President of HSNE. Since early 2019, Martijn has embarked on a new entrepreneurial path, helping out companies on their energy transition journeys. There he is, Martijn. He joins us today as the project manager for the Carbon Connect Delta project, which is probably the best available cross-border CCUS project at the moment, since it straddles, by definition, an international port entity and their tenants. But I'll leave that up to Martijn to explain. Martijn, all yours.
Thank you, Bruno. Well, welcome everyone. Delighted to have an opportunity here to talk a little bit about Carbon Connect Delta, the project that aims to unlock the CCS for the North Sea port area, and I'll talk a bit more about where that exactly is located. The Carbon Connect Delta project is essentially run through the Smart Delta Resources collaboration. And if we go to the next slide, the Smart Delta Resources collaboration is essentially a collaboration of a lot of different companies in the port area around Vlissingen, Terneuzen, and Ghent. So this is southwest of the Netherlands and northwest of Belgium, the cross-border area, which encompasses a number of different chemical, steel, energy, and food industries. And it's a very industrial port area, even though it may not rank very high in terms of its transfer of goods, it actually ranks very high in terms of its economic value add. And on top of that, as a reflection of its impact, the port area has about 30% of all Dutch hydrogen use, just in the industrial zone. This Smart Delta Resources runs a number of different programs and projects on behalf of all of its members. They have to do with the hydrogen transition, electrification of business processes, but also the infrastructure that is required in the port area. And in this case, also CCS is what we will talk a bit more about in the next few minutes. Next slide, please, Bruno. Smart Delta Resources, together with its members, has set out on a roadmap towards a climate neutral industry in the North Sea port area. And we have defined a number of reduction pathways, essentially going to 2030 and out to 2050. And it's built on the different programs that I've just mentioned. And the illustration here just shows how, from a starting point at present, where the total CO2 footprint of the North Sea port area and all the companies that are within the industrial zone sits just above 20 million tons per year. Through this transition roadmap, the aim is to reduce that almost by half by 2030 and get us close to climate neutrality, if you will, or zero CO2 industries by 2050. The different programs have different contributions, obviously. Hydrogen and the transition in that from gray to blue to green is incorporated. Electrification has a role to play, and CCS is an important component to take CO2 out of the industrial system. And for this CCS challenge, the members, or a subset of the members of the Smart Delta Resources collaboration, have set up a Carbon Connect Delta project. And the Carbon Connect Delta project fundamentally aims to lay the basis for a regional cross-border infrastructure, such that capture and transport and ultimately reuse or permanent storage of CO2 is dealt with by companies within the North Sea port area as a collaborative endeavor. At the bottom, you see the different companies that have cooperated into the Carbon Connect Delta projects together so far. And this is also a representation of kind of the cross-border aspects of the project. So ArcelorMittal steel facility on the Flemish side of the North Sea port area. Dow Chemicals, PaySam, which is a shareholder in one of the electricity plants, Yara, Zeeland Refinery, all industrial partners in the project, North Sea Port, Fluxus, and Gasunie, obviously the infrastructure entities that play an important role. Together, we've set out to look at the full chain of CCS, even though, of course, we're taking a perspective from the capture side. But in order to accelerate and create as high a pace as possible on these projects, you need to take an integrated perspective. I.e., you can only really start to invest and go through milestones on the capture side of these types of projects if you, at an early stage, already start to think about the storage options that are available, but not only available, also make sense in terms of capacity and timing, technology that's going to be required, and the transport facilities that will take the CO2 from one location to the other location. So it's an integrated development approach, and on top of that, it's quite sizable. The Carbon Connect Delta project has an ambition to be able to have 6.5 million tons of CO2 per year available for CCS by the year 2030. And this, of course, it's also very much integrated, because not every company will go necessarily at the same pace. But at the same time, decisions by the different companies are going to be dependent on each other. And in order to do this in a collaborative fashion, there needs to be an organization of all partners that can make this a reality. I'll say a bit more about the project specifics and some of the options and scenarios that we're looking at the moment. But of course, the technical side of it is only part of making a project like this a success. You need the right policy frameworks to be in place for CO2 transport, the right subsidy frameworks to be in place to have incentives for companies to move quickly. And there needs to be the right collaboration with a variety of stakeholders, and in a more broader sense, a societal acceptance that investments in CCS, even if it's a temporary measure in the full kind of energy transition journey, that funds are allocated towards us. Going to the next slide, please. So a little bit more about the project itself. Like I mentioned, it has several components to it. The capture side, the transport side, and the storage side, obviously. So let me first take a look at how we're evaluating the backbone infrastructure that we need in the port area itself. Of course, cost effectiveness is an important parameter, but it's not the only parameter. Obviously, we're also looking at criteria for the pace. We're looking at criteria for flexibility as potentially CO2 volumes change over time from the various partners in the project. We're looking at parameters of the risk profile of being able to realize a particular option and the financing options that are available for the different alternatives. And there are quite a few different alternatives. In the current phase of CarbonConnect Delta, we're essentially going through a feasibility of the various scenarios available and whether we can identify, say, the preferred case for the CarbonConnect Delta participants. You can see even in the port area, we're looking at transport over land, potentially going through an export pipeline to infrastructure near that's being built near Rotterdam in the future. And you can have multiple export routes out of the port area, either crossing a particular waterway in the middle or not, which gives us additional potential challenges in the realization. We're also looking at export through pipeline via an offshore route to already existing infrastructure near Rotterdam in the North Sea, as you can see, where actually currently the Portos project, one of the projects that probably is furthest along in the Dutch context, is going to be building and constructing its facilities. Besides export through pipeline, we're also evaluating the scenarios available through shipping, which means that in the regional infrastructure, the backbone of the North Sea port area, you need to make choices about connecting up different sites and bringing the CO2 together to one or two or multiple terminals for offloading into ships appropriate for transporting CO2. And so the variety of options in the North Sea port area is intricately linked to the optionality that is available for us in terms of its storage. So the next slide just indicates the type of considerations that we're having in the CarbonConnect Delta project around where to go with the CO2. Of course, there are many projects currently in development or in planning around the North Sea area, and we've been primarily thinking and focusing on a subset of them to see if the synergies in terms of timing, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of capacity, actually would make the scenarios that we are considering more viable. Along the Dutch coast, there are actually a number of projects which you may or may not be familiar with in Rotterdam and Amsterdam, and also notionally from the Den Helder port area, looking at offshore storage locations and different ways in which the Carbon Connect Delta project can connect with each one of those. In some cases, a pipeline connection may make a lot of sense, but distances are generally need to be relatively short. If you go further distances, then exporting the CO2 out of the North Sea port area through ship probably is relatively more attractive. And the optionality in storage locations is in a way integrated with the different options that we see in the backbone infrastructure. And of course, the backbone infrastructure intricately is linked to the project execution that the companies themselves are going through in terms of their capture facilities. So this is a very kind of quick insight in the type of evaluation that we're doing inside of the Carbon Connect Delta project at the moment. Like I said, by 2030, this needs to be up and running is the ambition of the project partners. I think we can already start to see ramp up towards these storage sites by the middle of this decade, but it depends on connecting all bits and pieces across the chain in a way that you can not only have an integrated assessment, but also have an integrated investment decision across the various pillars of a CCS project. But we need some further help, let me put it that way. So the next slide is just indicating some of the refinements in terms of policies that would really have still quite a bit of impact on the type of scenarios that we are considering. And these refinements have to do with how, for example, transport through shipping of CO2 is handled in the ETS framework. It has to do with transporting CO2 across national boundaries. Of course, this is particularly relevant for Carbon Connect Delta as a project because even inside the backbone of the project in the port area, we are already crossing borders with the CO2, let alone crossing borders when you're potentially storing it in an offshore location. We see that next to the European subsidy schemes, there are national subsidy schemes, and also for a project that it's by its very nature cross-border alignment with the various national subsidy schemes requires us to understand very specifically the conditions and the timing of it, and ideally their influence that we get a consistent application of subsidies across the whole of the project. And what we're also seeing in our current evaluation of scenarios is the transport over land through pipelines over longer distances is not always handled in the same in a level playing field sense. And so this discussion, for example, is especially playing out in the Dutch context, and would have, of course, quite a bit of an impact on the type of scenarios that we are considering at the moment. The next slide is essentially already my last one. So I've given you, hopefully, through these last few minutes, a quick insight into Carbon Connect Delta. This is a large-scale cross-border CCS project. It's very significant in terms of volume, has a very high ambition in terms of the pace that it's trying to achieve. It's very impactful for the North Sea port area in terms of its industrial footprint, but it's not a CCS project that stands on its own. It's part of a transition journey for the North Sea port that builds on these three pillars that I mentioned before: a hydrogen transition, electrification across the industrial zone, and CCS as a way to accelerate the reduction of the CO2 footprint of the port. With that, I'll hand it back over to Bruno, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or otherwise email me directly on the email that it's on the slide, and I'd be happy to engage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Martijn. That's great. Really good insight into this project, and I'm sure the questions later will, the questions are already flowing in, so I'm sure there's bound to be a bunch for you later on. Next person to speak with us today here is Helene de Koning. Helene is a full professor of socio-technical innovation and climate change, both at Eindhoven University of Technology and at Radboud University. Educated in chemistry, environmental, earth and life sciences, she is passionate about fighting climate change to the point she even did a TED talk about it once. You might want to check that on YouTube. Her work sits on the intersection of technology innovation and international climate change, and it's therefore no surprise that she's been engaged in CCS since the early 2000s. Helene is Radboud University's principal investigator in the C4U project, about which she will now explain more in her presentation.
Thanks very much. I think I need to share my screen. Great, yeah. Thank you for that introduction and for the opportunity to speak at this webinar. I'm sharing my screen now. Sorry about this. It is especially a pleasure for me, as the area that Martijn just described, the area covered by the North Sea port, is where I grew up. You should know that the province of Zeeland is a rural area with small historic towns, villages populated by religious farmers of sugar beets and other crops that grow well in the heavy Zeeland clay. And as a girl, I used to play chess at a small chess club in one of those villages. I used to go to the boulevard in my town of Vlissingen and watch the ships that pass extremely close to the shore there. You could see the pilots leaving the small town harbor in Vlissingen, climb on board to guide the ship to the treacherous, continuously changing waters of the Westerschelde on their way to the harbor of Antwerp or the chemical industries in Terneuzen and beyond. Several of the children in my elementary school class had fathers who did that kind of work. And from the Vlissingen Boulevard, you could see the chimneys of the refinery in Vlissingen Oost, and in clear weather, even these Dow factories in Terneuzen. Now, these industries have to change completely in the next 30 years. In order to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, a goal in the Paris Agreement, the world needs to emit net zero CO2 in 2050. This will eventually involve eliminating the use of fossil fuels, the current mainstay of the energy and feedstocks needed for chemicals and steel in the North Sea port area. But while fossil fuels are being phased out, the CO2 that's still produced in the meantime needs to be captured and stored away from the atmosphere as much as possible. We're talking about many millions of tons of CO2 annually that need to be avoided or stored, nothing short of a transformation in only 30 years. 30 years, that's about the time between me as that girl in Vlissingen and me now. And frankly, it feels like yesterday to me. And if that feels like yesterday, 2050 feels like only tomorrow. With every bit of warming, we increase sea levels and the chances that other calamities occur. The province of Zeeland has a high stake in preventing climate change. Everyone in the Netherlands knows about the ramp, the disaster in 1953, when due to a combination of a heavy northwestern storm, spring tide, and neglected maintenance, many dikes broke. In that bitter cold night of the 1st of February and the aftermath, over 1,800 people died, as well as tens of thousands of cattle. My father, who was 10 years old at that time, remembers having to haul sandbags to help fortify a dike near the town of Goes, where he lived. The dike and the town were saved. The political conclusion was clear: never again. And from then on, dike maintenance was prioritized. And more was done. The Delta Works, a public investment of tens of billions of guilders over more than 3 decades, were constructed to lend credence to the never again. It provided lots of employment in the region and across the Netherlands, and contributed to making the Netherlands the uncontested world leader in water engineering. But this amazing piece of engineering will reach its expiry date much sooner than anybody had anticipated when the last dam was opened in 1987. The reason is sea level rise. The dams will soon not be good enough anymore. Never again. Those words spoken so confidently after the 1953 flood do not sound so sure anymore in times of climate change. Although I now engage quite a lot with industry, when I was a girl, the industries felt very removed from the daily realities of my school day, my parents' jobs, and the activities of practically everyone I knew. I think it's fair to say that the population of Zeeland is largely unaware of the transformation that has to happen in those industrial areas that are so close and yet so far. And I think this provides an opportunity of making the people part of the transition, consulting them on how to manage it and engaging them along with other stakeholders. This is one of the areas that the C4U project is looking into. I will say a bit more about C4U, the reason I was asked to address you here. It is a Horizon 2020 project, so funded by the European Commission. It's led by University College London with 20 other research and private sector partners. The core objective of the project is to demonstrate 2 CO2 capture technologies in the steel industry and look at the integration of the technology with the industrial cluster around the ArcelorMittal steel plant in Ghent. The cluster crosses a national border, that of the Belgium and the Netherlands, and extends over the full North Sea port area. We have just heard about the Carbon Connect Delta project, and we very much look forward to a fruitful collaboration. In addition to the technical parts of the project, C4U looks explicitly at societal readiness and at stakeholder engagement. Societal readiness for CCUS can imply readiness of firms to change their business models. It can include the readiness of public sector stakeholders, including the Flemish and Dutch governments and the European Commission, to regulate and to help realize the necessary infrastructure. It can also include readiness of the people living in the area to embrace the changes. My colleagues at Radboud University will use group model building techniques to develop a system dynamics model that clarifies the enablers and barriers to CCUS in the area, beyond the usual techno-economic and environmental assessments. The partial focus on societal engagement around CCS is not just because we like fluffy research. Many of you will remember the Barendrecht project initiated by Shell to capture and store the emissions of one of its refineries, which was cancelled about 10 years ago in the Netherlands because of strong public resistance. This might have been prevented when people had been involved early in the planning, decision-making and implementation. Social scientists had even offered help to the Dutch government on this process, but circumstances did not allow for that. The context in the Carbon Connect Delta project is very different from Barendrecht, but we see a pattern in a type of industrial climate mitigation projects with low public involvement and some perceived risks that contain very important lessons. Not only do we know that CCS projects risk resistance without meaningful public engagement, there's more. Imagine that Zeeland and East Flanders people could be involved in the industrial transition and learn more about climate change and the circular economy. This could be connected to the urban and mobility transitions that are also needed, to the land transitions that need to happen to reduce the agricultural footprint and to adapt to increasingly salty soils, and to the energy transition, of course. Perhaps they've only been involved in a two-way dialogue with a CCUS project. In that case, they've had a chance to learn about and help shape the development of the project, and thus feel part of the transformation of their local area. But perhaps, just like the Delta works, the future careers of many sons and daughters of Zeeland and Flanders lie in this new climate-neutral industry, in a rural area in need of investments, using the industrial opportunities in their own backyards to protect the land they care about could benefit industry, the people, and the planet. 30 years is tomorrow, and to still have a chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, the time to act and to engage locally is now. So that the girl who's now standing on the Vlissingen Boulevard, staring at the chimneys in the distance, knows what's going on there and knows that it benefits her future. Thank you very much for your attention. And Bruno, over to you.
Thanks very much for that beautiful presentation, Helene. That was great. I'm conscious of time and I'm going to hurry up straight away. As we've seen so far, cross-border projects require collaboration between private companies amongst themselves, between private and academia, like Helene does. And our next two guests are going to expand that to public-private and even public-public collaboration. They represent both Benelux business and embody Benelux institutions par excellence. Very briefly, Frans Wekers, Deputy Secretary General of the Benelux Union. He's trained in both economics and law and has ample experience in domestic Dutch politics and in international organizations such as the EBRD and the EIB. Frans will first introduce the Union and explain a little bit on how it influences and supports cross-border collaboration. Following by which, and I'm just briefly going to explain the basics, Erik ter Hark, is founder and chairman of the Benelux Business Roundtable. This initiative embodies his past experiences founding, heading, and advising a long list of private businesses and organizations, such as the Dutch Chamber of Commerce in Belgium and Luxembourg. The BBR is a non-profit organization bringing together leaders from some of the largest Benelux companies in terms of contribution to GDP, employment, and assets. So, gentlemen, welcome aboard. Glad to have you here. Brief word of introduction, perhaps, and then we'll have a conversation, hopefully, of interest to many people here.
Thank you very much, Bruno. First of all, I would like to congratulate all of you with the organizing of this webinar, and I would also thank Martijn Verwoerd for explaining the Delta Carbon Connect Delta North Seaport project, and I was impressed by the very interesting presentation of Helene de Koning and also beautiful pictures of Zeeland. Let me first tell something about the Benelux Union. Then I'm afraid most of you are not aware of what it does, or even not aware that it exists. But the Benelux Union is an intergovernmental organization. The first talks about cooperation between the governments of the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg started at the end of World War II, and back in time, the authorities decided to cooperate in a customs union. Nowadays, in the European Union, we take it for granted, the customs union, but actually it started as a pilot in Benelux. Later on, Benelux Economic Union was established. It's now called the Benelux Union because it's more than just economic cooperation. And actually, the two missions of the Benelux Union are to foster cross-border cooperations within the three countries and to be a living lab, a laboratory for Europe. So in issues, the issues tabled on the European Union level can be taken forward in the Benelux by the three governments of the Benelux Union to be a front runner in Europe. So not against Europe, not to duplicate Europe, but to be a front runner and to act as a living lab. I think it's good to say that within that the Benelux Union and its member states can issue legally binding and political instruments like recommendations, agreements, decisions, and treaties. And as time is running, I don't walk through all those instruments we have, but in fact, it enables cross-border cooperation in a very good way. So as soon as the governments of the three countries included, let's say, the several governments in Belgium on the let's say the sub-regional governments, as soon as they have the same in mind, we can act quickly and solve, let's say, some cross-border issues in terms of regulations, in terms of political will, in terms of procedures. I think it's good to stress that possibility the Benelux Union has. It's also good to tell that the Benelux Prime Ministers called in their Benelux Summit 1 month ago for ambitious national recovery and resilience plans to use the opportunities to transform into a sustainable, climate neutral and circular economy against the backdrop of the European relaunch and green recovery. The Benelux has developed into the home of regional energy cooperation over the last decade, has a lot of experience, not just within the geographical area of the Benelux countries, but also in close cooperation with France, Germany, and some other countries in energy issues. We call it the Penta cooperation. We also have a North Sea cooperation with other countries, and in those fora we discuss, let's say, issues and try to find solutions. I think it's good to see, well, to have a closer look to the letter of the CCUS addressed to Flanders and the Netherlands. The Benelux, the Business Roundtable identifies 3 key ingredients for successful CCUS: cross-border and cross-sector collaboration, open access transport infrastructure, and scale. And with a clear mandate from the Benelux Committee of the Ministers, the Benelux Union could foster cross-border cooperation and facilitate cross-border transport infrastructure. We don't have that clear mandate for CCU and CCS, not yet, but the topic of CCU, CCS is of great interest of the Benelux Union, of the Secretariat General, and we are now in the stage of finalizing our year plan for next year. So we are waiting for the approval of the capitals in the 3 countries, and what we aim is to organize in 2021 a Benelux Energy Innovation Day, focusing on the role and potential of carbon capture, use and storage in the energy transition in the Benelux. So I don't have a mandate yet for this specific topic, I hope we will get the mandate soon by organizing such an innovation day. And I see, let's say, this meeting this afternoon as a very good stimulus to go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frans. Thank you very much. I hope everybody has lots of questions from that and keep sending them through. Angus is collecting them. Erik, would you like to address the audience, please?
Yes, thank you, Bruno. Erik de Hark. If you see me smiling, that is because of the last remark of Frans, the Deputy Secretary General of the Benelux Union, with whom the Benelux Business Roundtable has been working since its start very closely and in complete transparency. I would say I'm very happy to hear Frans say that in the 3-year plan that is under development, CCUS will be a part if approved, and he specifically cited the key ingredients which we as the roundtable consider important: cross-border and cross-sector collaboration, open access, transport infrastructure, and scale. Now, a few words perhaps on the Benelux Business Roundtable and why does it exist? In fact, the origin dates to 2011-12, when I came together with my good friend and recently departed Jean-Pierre Bloemberg, lawyer very much involved in financial issues, and we both expressed the deep frustration that both Belgium and the Netherlands had seen their principal banks disappear into the hands of foreign countries in the financial crisis. And the overall assessment of the situation was that the regulatory instances between Belgium and the Netherlands have not been able to work solidly and in a friendly manner together, which could have been one of the reasons why we came to this endpoint. So that has been frustrating, of course, for a lot of companies, for which the two big banks were, of course, important players. Then came the various crises that Europe went through, and the realization that if Europe has difficulties of making progress on vital projects, perhaps we should go back to smaller scale regions, and the Benelux, of course, is then one of the best positioned areas in Europe to do so, not only because we have a common culture and a shared history, but also because we are small countries with a similar economic profile. And on top of that, we are linked through a treaty which provides a toolbox to go further and faster if and where Europe either refuses or is slowing down on regulatory issues. We have defined a number of issues where we consider that states individually cannot solve them, but need the help of either neighbors or a larger community. And those issues are energy, infrastructure, digitalization, labor mobility. In the last 2 years, I would say, energy has become perhaps the most important part of the issues that the Benelux Business Roundtable is looking at. We have issued and I assume that the information is available at the end of this presentation, Bruno, on information that can be consulted. And I refer to that, the Benelux Green Deal. And there is also a document that we recently sent out to the prime ministers of the three countries on the issue of the London Protocol, the need for especially the Belgian government to ratify the London Protocol so that CO2 transport can cross borders to be deposited in the deep sea. Without such ratification, that is not possible. And we also reached out to the Dutch and Flemish prime ministers who held their Dutch-Flemish summit last week with our document, which you can also consult, on the case for CCUS in the Benelux. The case for the CCUS in the Benelux is an obvious one. I think if there is one part in Europe where all elements come together to make this a successful and necessary project, it is the Benelux. And we plead very much, and this is the business community that is speaking, and we know that the Benelux Union is working hard to do this on the public side, but we are absolutely convinced that the potential of this region is enormous. And in order to unlock the potential, of course, we have to come together in the private sector, but also in the public sector, but most importantly, public and private together. And if there's one area where public and private collaboration is necessary, all studies show it, everybody is in agreement on it. We have to work together to solve this enormous energy issue that we are facing in the coming years, and which has been so eloquently explained by Helene. So our mission is, we consider, to make sure that this public-private collaboration is facilitated. It is true that if you look at the various stakeholders, there is what I would call a vacuum on the business side for companies that put the Benelux issues first and foremost. There are national federations, of course, who do that at the national level. They talk together, but we as a Benelux roundtable, we put the interest of the region as a whole at the heart of our action. And that's where I would like to stop. If there's one area where that is predominantly important, it is in the energy transition, and of which the CCUS, the CCS in particular, and that has been also clearly shown in the second slide of Martijn van Woert, CCS is absolutely indispensable. If we want to reach the targets of 2030 to 50, all parameters show that if you don't use CCS, you will never get there. So we should overcome resistance. We should work with all stakeholders concerned to make sure that this huge potential of the Benelux can be realized. And I'm sure, and we are all sure at this side of the table, that it will be beneficial for our economy, for our job creation, and for the welfare and the well-being of the people living here. Thank you, Bruno.
Thank you. That's beautiful words. You should have been a politician. Eric, I had prepared a first question, but you sort of already answered that, so that makes it somewhat difficult. But I'm going to perhaps take that particular question a different tack. The question was, what exactly does industry need from governments that cannot be provided by either Dutch or Flemish, Belgian governments on their own? How can, and then for France, how can the union help with those aspects? But you've already stated that it's the areas, it's energy, it's infrastructure, it's digitization, etc. That sort of triggered another question to me, and feel free for either one of you to respond. If we are such small countries and we've still got our own CO2 targets, we've got our individual emissions reductions plans and even energy markets to some extent. Is there a scope for even combining those and looking at those in an integrated way? Is there a way that we can have common targets and literally one energy market between our small countries?
Well, it is certainly an issue that we address in the other document that I referred to, the Benelux Green Deal, where we plead for a Benelux energy market. It's another topic than, of course, the CCS. It's a bigger topic, but we are absolutely convinced that try to maintain individual small energy markets is something of the past. Europe is trying to do it at a European level, which creates some difficulties because the 27 have different profiles than the 3 countries of the Benelux. But it's obvious that a consolidated, integrated energy market is necessary. If you only take the wind energy that's going to be produced on the North Sea in the Doggerbanks region, the volume is such that it will be far too much for the Dutch market alone. So it has to be exported to make this project profitable. So that export will probably go to neighboring countries. For that, you need to expand the grids. There will be energy coming in from Germany, from the windmills in Germany. There will be energy coming in from the UK. We will be exporting energy to the UK. So it is obvious that you cannot do this. Well, you can do it, of course, on a national basis, but it will always be suboptimal.
Yeah. Frans, any comments? How can the union help achieve that?
Well, first of all, I agree with Erik that you need a larger scale. And let's say for the European continent, the best way would be to make arrangements of trans-European networks in energy, in carbon pricing, in, let's say, all the issues connected to energy and also climate, to have, let's say, a common European energy market. But it takes 27 member states to come together and to agree on many issues. So you can set ambitions, but then you have a lot to do in a technical way. You have to invest a lot, and so on and so forth. And that's why the Benelux Union and the Benelux member states started to talk about this issue. And that forum is enlarged, and it's now called the Pentalateral Energy Forum, of which the Benelux Union is the secretariat. And that Pentalateral Energy Forum is the regional energy cooperation in Central Western Europe. So that's Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, that's Benelux, Germany, France, Austria, and Switzerland. And that's steered by the Ministers for Energy based on the work of expert groups and supported again by the Benelux Secretariat. And that pushes for regional market integration, security of supply, and flexibility. They also, in this forum, the Pentalateral Forum will also explore the options for carbon pricing and the cross-border impact on energy prices. And as we speak, a workshop will be organized this month on the role of carbon pricing in realizing the energy transition and climate goals. And I can also mention that recently, together with France, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, the energy ministers signed the hydrogen declaration. It's the purpose of producing green hydrogen that is transported across the countries. And actually, Benelux and neighboring countries can organize cooperation on a, let's say, a sub-regional level in Europe, and can then be also front runner for the EU 27. And it's on many issues. It's we talk about standard setting. We talk about making inventory where what's needed to foster cross-border cooperation, what's needed to connect networks, and so on and so forth. And in terms of regulation, again, there are some specific instruments. As what Erik said, the Benelux Union has a special provision in the EU treaty. It's called it's Article 350, which gives the Benelux the opportunity to move ahead of the EU 27, not against the European Union, not against the acquis communautaire, but to be a real front runner and laboratory. And what we need is, let's say, very, let's say, from the business side, projects, cross-border projects. We can support cross-border projects not by ourselves with money. Then the Benelux Union doesn't have a pot of money to issue subsidies. But what we can do is let's say, to align interests in the countries. Talk with countries to let's say, when they talk about their national subsidy schemes, to align those. And what we also could do in case of money from the European Commission, that we make a support letter for cross-border projects in the Benelux. And we have some experience that it helps enormously to achieve the goals and to get the money and to show those projects to other European countries that working across the borders can be beneficial, let's say, for the whole region.
Very good. Thank you. I'm being prompted by the people behind the screens that we are running severely out of time. So thank you. I'll scrap most of my questions, and I'm also aware that the audience might have only limited time as well. So maybe final question for Erik, if I may. After which, what we'll do is we'll take all the questions, we'll digest them, we'll share them around to the right people, and try to answer them back to you along with the invitation for the recording of this webinar. Erik, do you have any insight in the other than, yes, it saves jobs, yes, it's great for we need to save industry from going across borders or to non-CO2 pricing regions? Have you got an insight in the value of CCS, the number of jobs saved, the number of new jobs created at GDP? I imagine that will likely help policymakers to grant funding.
It's an obvious question, but I am not going to give you precise figures because there is no common position on this. Let me say this. I think Helen made reference to the flooding in Zeeland in 1953 and the enormous amounts of money that have been invested in a never again scenario. The benefits of that work has been that the Dutch have been solicited all over the world to do similar works on land protection, dike construction, water management, and what have you. Why do I say this? There is an absolute conviction with the companies that I'm in contact with that the innovation that will be coming from this Green Deal initiative by the European Commission, which, by the way, is just a reflection of what is living in society and what consumers and public at large wants, will be a source of wealth creation in this area. You can also put it otherwise. If we don't act, because we cannot conclude on who is going to pay the bill and who is going to follow whose regulations, the detrimental effect of that will be far worse for this region, which is a region that is built on maritime experience, which is built on transport, on logistics, chemical, petrochemical industry. If we don't do this well, there will be an enormous disbenefit, if you want to call it that way. On the other, but that's a negative. The positive is that there is this conviction that the innovation that will be released from these type of projects will be enormous. Let's take for one example. If we are able to construct this backbone, for example, let's take the Carbon Connect, or let's take Antwerp at Sea, which are big projects. We can take Portos. They will collect the CO2 produced in this part of Europe, or at least in the Benelux, but Germany has no access to deep sea storage. Belgium has no access to deep sea storage. France has difficult access to deep sea storage. So it is obvious that if we start to create these facilities, connection by other countries, by neighboring countries, is going to follow. There are already discussions between Belgium and Germany to see if and how pipelines between the Ruhrgebiet and Antwerp can be constructed. So there is this whole dynamic in which if we don't act, Germany is not going to construct a pipeline through Belgium or through the Netherlands to get rid of its CO2. But if we take the lead in this, others will follow. So that is my long-term answer to your question. Figures will necessarily follow once projects are in a final stage of decision.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, both. I'm not sure if I'm still sharing my screen. The question and answers, probably not. Show my screen. Am I sharing the right screen? Can you see my screen or?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So on that note, I would like to thank all presenters, Benelux Business Roundtable, Benelux Union, Smart Delta Resources, Martijn and Helene from the C4U project. I hope the audience is forgiving us to run over time and to not be able to do the question and answers. But if you want more information, here's some links. Find us on Spotify as well. There's a good, the whole CCS Talks series is available there or on YouTube. Thank you to the people behind the screens. Thank you to the audience for sending the questions. And hopefully we will see you again for the next event. Have a pleasant rest of the afternoon. Take care. Bye-bye.